Hello, everyone. My name is Christian. Welcome to my hobby blog. Today, I'm very excited because we have a guest today. We have Amber from the Road to Top Valon podcast here to discuss everything The Expanse, mostly the first six books, and we'll also touch upon the show because that's what we're sort of preparing for. But welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to jump into The Expanse. This is a series that is very close to my heart. And at a time when I was kind of in a drought looking for new books and series after not having so much that was really like pulling me in, when I found The Expanse, I was like, okay, like I was invested. And obviously that came from watching the first season of the show. And after that, I was like, oh, this is a book series. Okay, let's do this. Yeah.
Yeah, I found The Expanse through, I want to say, George R. R. Martin because he has that quote on the bottom of every single volume. And I just finished up book six, but on the bottom of every single one, it says, Interplanetary Adventure the way it ought to be written. And I was like, that sounds great. And then I forgot that they were books. And years later, I saw season one. I was like, this is really great. I think it's a book series. And I looked it up. And sure enough, it was. So uh, it wasn't until we were in that book club together going through the Expanse that I finally jumped into it, and I really enjoy it. There's a lot of political machinations going on, but we
Oh,
also
yes.
have the really hard sci-fi elements with the proto molecule, and that's when I love the series most. Is when we're dealing with the proto molecule, and I guess for those who don't know, or I guess you say now before we jump too deep into spoilers, this is spoilers all the way through books one to six, and also season one because I have seen that, but I haven't seen beyond that. So we'll kind of touch upon all of that. So, but the proto molecule takes a back seat in the later books, and I don't like it at all. I wish there
Yeah.
was more with it, but do we want to focus on kind of positives right now of the book series, or do we want to jump right in?
Yeah, let's focus on the positives. I, like you, also really enjoyed the proto-molecule element of it. That first book comes in so hard, and there's conspiracy and mystery and maybe like a small touch of horror as well. And so, like, all of that together, you think, the whole series is going to really rely on this proto-molecule element. And while it does drive the entire story, like, this is the pushing force that moves the entire series forward, it's not going to be the main topic of every book because we're dealing with all of the setbacks and all of the consequences that all of these characters are dealing with due to this one domino falling and starting off a chain reaction in the entire solar system. And so, yeah, like protomolecule, really cool, but I wasn't too disappointed when the books kind of veered from that because I feel like it also excels really well in the character development and the characterizations of all of these people that you come across, where they're growing and some of them are maybe regressing. And there's always these internal conflicts that all of our characters are dealing with. And that comes in the form of this political back and forth that we see. And then the conspiracies and mysteries that are happening, they might not always take a forefront of the story, but they're all there. And it's just, there's so many good elements kind of like smushed in, and it's fun. It's really fun. It's a great, fun series.
Yeah, I agree about how it's definitely a mishmash of very good elements altogether, especially early on in the series, because we have this really fun mystery with Miller looking for Clarissa Mao's sister, I believe, because I forgot her name, but
Julie.
Julie, yeah. He's looking for Julie, and we're like, hey, we're along for the ride. This is a pretty, I don't want to say standard, but it's a tropey detective character. And he's so interesting and intriguing. I love his no bullshit attitude. He's like, what do you want? And he just punches people in the face when they're being awful. And he doesn't really care about the consequences, but he finally finds something to hold on to. And from there, that's when everything in the series opens up because we also have the Rocinante ship crew that is running alongside that story with Miller, and those are the really two main POVs we get. And for the rest of the series, sometimes they separate, sometimes they're together. And I think when the series was at its best was when they were together, but everyone was sort of there's always one person missing. So I really like I think it's Cabola's burn when the rocks fall, or when they go through the ring world, and there's like a I don't know a rebel faction going on where they don't want they're taking a hold of all the supplies as everyone's
Yeah.
landing, and that was my favorite book, I think, because it had the proto
Yeah.
molecule stuff and it also had the internal conflicts with all of our characters, and that's when Holden really shines in the character development because he does not want to be at the front of everything. He just kind of goes in not thinking, and that's his arc in the early series. But in that book, that's when he really steps up, and I love everything with that. That book was my favorite.
That's a really fun plot for all of the reasons that you touched on, and also because, in my opinion, this is where it starts to kind of fall into this space western where everyone's scrambling to get the things that they need, and the whole world opens up to them. So who can profit off of this? Who can make money off of it? Who can carve out some chance of survival in this brave new world? And then on top of that, like, hence the name, like the expanse, everything becomes so much more expansive. The world really opens up. And then we have the whole plot on Illis, which that that was maybe my least favorite book or season, actually, but it's still really good because of that way that it makes me feel. Like, it feels so timeless, like, of a story, and it's not trying to be this, like, we go from horror to politics to conspiracy to Western, and it's really like spanning all of these genres, but it's still keeping, I think, the adventure part like at the forefront, maybe.
Yeah, one of the coolest parts of everything with Eyeless is when the volcano goes off because of the proto
Yeah.
molecule, and they just have to learn how to survive after the eruption. And then we have one of my favorite parts, which is when Miller shows up and is like, "Hey, you have to come here now. Something's about to happen." And
Miller Bot.
I love everything with Miller, and this is when I was really started to really struggle with the series. Is when Holden gets rid of that kind of massive proto molecule that's keeping Miller tied to the
Connected.
Rocinante. Yeah, and when he got rid of that, I was like, oh no, that there goes the last of the proto molecule plot. And since then, the last I think 2 books since Holden did that in the epilogue, it's all been politics, which is fine. I really love it. I love seeing these characters in these different environments and having to kind of tackle and figure things out and balance built the Belter politics, balancing the outer planets, uh, everything. And I guess Fred Johnson is one of my favorite characters in this
Yeah.
series because of that, because he's sort of the magnet that is keeping all of these plots together. And once
Hmm.
he dies, I think it's early book 6, the book I was reading, that's when everything just kind of falls apart for me in the series.
Yeah, I can totally understand why. Like, I definitely see your point of view on that. But knowing what comes next, like after this group that you've read, I know why it would be disappointing, but when you move on, I was like, okay, so this is where this is going. And things just get really, really wild. I wasn't quite sure if I knew like that's where the book was headed, but I do think, oh, I'm trying to be really careful right now and not do any spoilers. I'll move back a little bit. So Fred Johnson really is, like you said, this magnet. Like he's like the sun in this picture where everyone else is kind of just revolving around him and he's holding things together. But the way that his character is played out in the books, especially if you go back and you read his novella, The Butcher of Anderson Station, he becomes such a compelling character where you're like, oh, okay, wow, wow, okay. Like that's where he got his start from. And in the beginning, he's presented as like, can we trust this guy? Is he someone that we can come to when he's offering us kind of this help, for lack of better word? And the actor that plays his character in the show is just so good. I mean, it was really great seeing certain characters like him who are really complex on screen because I think they really just hands down everyone nails it in terms of the casting department. Like hands down, they're all amazing. Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the show again because I watched season one years ago when it first uh, went to Amazon Prime and they uploaded them all and then started releasing the following seasons. And I remember watching them, being like, wow, this is so good. And I started the second season. I was like, actually, I want to read the books first. And I
Yeah.
really love knowing these characters now because now I can kind of, I don't want to say judge, but I can study the casting and really see if they fit how I viewed them in my head canon. Because that's some of the funnest parts of watching adaptations of books is seeing the cast.
Were there any, so okay, also something that I do like is they have in the books this rotating cast of POVs that show up every new book for the most part. And they're usually new characters. So like it feels very episodic where everyone's having their own kind of personal story that isn't so much tied to the grand scale of the whole series. But regardless, like some of them are really, really good. And then there are a handful where I was kind of just like, ugh, like I'm not feeling this character very much. And for the most part, every time that I kind of got like burned out on a character, usually right around the last third of the book, things pick up and then that character becomes really compelling. And then you're like, oh, okay, like things are getting really interesting. And I don't know, like every time that I thought I was getting bored somewhere with a character, I would eventually be like, "Oh, okay, like that's happening now." I mean, Anna the preacher and is it Persepolis Rising? I don't remember the
Mhm.
names. It's all mixed up for me. But Anna, I found her so insufferable. Like
Oh,
I just couldn't, I was not a big fan. And then by the end of the book, I'm like, oh, come on, Anna, come on. And she's doing stuff and it's really cool. And I'm like, yeah, okay. She got me. Like, she got me.
yeah, that was the book. What I think it's book 3 or 4. That was around the time when I started to notice that pattern of things really ramping up that book, and Anna, I actually really liked early on. I didn't really care for the villain on that ship. I forgot his name. I think it's like
Bull.
Bowl. Well, is
Or
it
no, no,
Bowl?
no. No, it's Ashford.
Yeah, Ashford. Yeah, Ashford was absolutely terrible. And I love the POVs of Bull and Anna, and because Bull's the security like
Mhm.
manager guy, and he was just so fun to read the POVs of. And Anna was sort of that human side of it, because Bull kills people pretty quickly throughout the book. And when everything comes to a head at the end of Persephone's, well, I'd look, but I can't remember. At the end of that book, when everyone is flying through the air and Anna is shooting people and Bull is shooting people,
Yes.
that is
Yes.
like, I can't wait to
It's
see
a
that on the show.
shootout. It's a shootout. Yeah. That moment was really great. I really enjoyed it. And I mean, for the most part, all of the books I feel like are in that same category where even if there's a plot line where I'm kind of like, it's all right, like I always get pulled back in by the end at least. The Illis plot line was very different because for the first time, the Rocinante is grounded.
Hmm.
And I did not love that because I think part of the thrill of it for me was all of these space battles. And then we have like characters like Anna and whatnot, like doing zero G or low G maneuvers and shootouts and stuff like that. And then when they're on Illis, it feels so like Earth-like. They feel so bound, held down. I mean, gravity, yes, but like metaphorically too, like they're grounded. And it's interesting and it in the way that it's different. But I do appreciate how in that book we have all of this, I guess, like tech awaking on the planet, and everyone's just like, what? Because I felt that way too. I was like, what is happening? And then we have Miller, who, like, I guess, like the consciousness of Miller jumps into like a mech, like a bot kind of. So we've got like a like robot conscious Miller, like things get wild and that's really fun too.
Yeah, I can't. Like, I don't have like a image in my head of what that could look like. Like, I'm surprised I haven't seen like a meme or a GIF of him like in the robot form. I feel like that's
Yeah,
really held down for people who haven't seen it.
I it reminds me of some weird book that I read like when I was a kid where there's this like multi-sided shape thing that was alive, and the way that it is described in the books, I think it was like very triangular or something, but I will say the way that they did it on the show, you can tell that's when they got uh their Prime Video Amazon money because that's when the visuals kind of take a step up. And honestly, like I really love that for the show. Like I'm happy that they got that budget increase because you can get things like the Miller bot and it doesn't look goofy. But at the same time, like a part of me still really loves those season 1 through 3 smaller sets that kind of look dingy and dark. And then by the time you get to book 4, season 4, you're like, whoa, okay. Like they've got a little, like, it's a little bit more glamorous. And I don't know, you can tell where the money comes in there. But I mean, both aspects to it, the writing still remains the same. They kept the same people on board. So, like, the writing always felt really consistent with the books. And I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, because the authors were directly involved, right?
Yeah. What a difference that makes.
So I was gonna say, the funny thing I've always kind of had in the back of my mind whenever I think about the Expanse is that we have that quote that I read earlier. It's by George R. R. Martin. One of them was an assistant for George R. R. Martin, and the entire series, including the TV series, came out between the publishing of A Dance with Dragons and now.
Dot, dot, dot. Yeah.
And it's really funny to think about that because I've it took me like 2 years to get through this series, I think, and most of it had to do with those slower books where I think Illis took me the longest to read, but I really enjoyed it in sort of the way that I enjoyed Crossroads of Twilight. And that it was like,
Okay.
okay, it's more time for me to hang out with my favorite characters. I can see them in a different environment. They have to do stuff they don't usually have to. I love the Amos, uh, portions of that book where he's taking care of other people, and Naomi is stuck up in the orbit and is having to look after Holden. And Holden does not take care of himself at all. He's always just
No.
pushing himself to the end. And that's the book that
Yeah.
he really shines, I think, Amos and Holden.
Yeah. I think for me, I always really loved Naomi, and it wasn't until book 5 where, like, her story becomes a main staple because her background is very mysterious. You get little glimpses of it here and there, but then when we have the Naomi book, it's all about her background and her ex Marco and their son. And for me, that's when she really shines as a character. But as the book series goes on, you get more from her and she becomes such an important figure for the entire crew. And I like that not every female character, like we have Bobby, right? She's like the brawler. She is just, muscle, like she's made out of steel. And then we have Amos, who's kind of in that similar category, but he's very emotionally stunted. And so you have all of these kind of misfits, and Naomi always feels kind of like the mother of the group, where she's not mothering them, but she's very there for like this emotional support. I feel like, even if it's not like she's not their therapist or anything like that, but she's always there and she kind of she's the cool head, she keeps things calm between all of these other characters. And I love that we can have a character like that where she is smart and she is caring and she is kind, but she also isn't falling into this default like mother character where it's kind of a stereotype, I feel like sometimes when men write women characters. And I love that because there's so much there. There's so much you can do with characters, especially female characters, and not end up running into this stereotypical, like, well, like, how do we what's her deal? How do we make this person? And it's all done so well in the Expanse. Like we have Christian Avasarala, who is politician to her core, but she is also really driven by this need to know all the answers. And her brain is a wonderful thing because when everyone is just oblivious, she's the one who's, like, constantly running numbers and calculating things, kind of in the same way that Miller is, where he gets put on the case, so he actively is like they're like, "Hey, you go do this." So he's, like, following clues and doing his thing. But Avasarala, she is just like she's like, like puts a finger in the air and she can feel the wind change and she's like, something is just off here. And I love that. Like we have all of these many like different faceted types of people in this story. And when I'm talking about like our main characters, and they're just so fun. Like Holden, I think, I mean, starts off as the white knight, where it's just like, oh, this guy is so annoying. But then he grows on you and he becomes better and more, I guess, aware of how he's acting. And then we have Amos, who is just like emotionally stunted, but trying to do the good thing and the best and help people the way he can. and his, I guess, soft spot for children and people who need help in that way, like those who can't protect themselves, I guess. It's just like, ugh, like it's heartwarming, and it's so funny because again, I'm like, oh, action, like drama, suspense, conspiracy, but then it's like, oh, like you still get the warm, tingly feeling from some of the characters.
Yeah, and I really love how each book we get the background of one of the Rocinante characters, because Holden I did not like at all. My
In the
first,
beginning.
yeah, in the beginning, I hated him on the
Same,
show.
same.
I did not like him in the books. He's just really, really frustrating to read. And it wasn't until book two that I was like, okay, there's a lot more to this guy. And I think that had to do with that romance plot, the very early romance plot between him and Naomi, which was very awkward, and Holden wasn't being honest at all with Naomi. And Naomi was like, you just need to figure out what you want, and then you can date me, because I know what I want and you do not. Like, we need to see eye to eye. And I love that we finally do get Naomi's background, because although I do not like Philippe or Mako, I love reading about, or sort of now understanding why Naomi never talked about it, because there's a great moment and towards the end of book six when uh, the proto molecule ring world thing just swallows Mako and the ship and everybody, and everyone's like, the mass was too big. I don't know what happened, and
Yeah.
we have that moment where Holden and Naomi talk about. Naomi's like, "You were never supposed to learn about this. I never really wanted this to involve all of y'all." And in the end, it was so central to everything that was going wrong on my
Yeah.
side, because I needed to address it. I shouldn't have run away, and now it's coming back. And sorry, and Holden's
How
like,
did you
whatever.
How did you like the separation of characters and then like the rejoining of them from book five to six? Because five, everyone just is on their own journey, I guess. Did that make it hard for you when they weren't all together?
So I loved book five. I was not happy at the end when Philippe and Mako was not kind of resolved, and I realized that the entire book six was going to be about, resolving that. But when they were separated, I loved that. I love everything with Amos. I loved getting Clarissa Mao's POV of her in the prison and having to sort of get through her PTSD and trauma that she had with
Hmm.
her sister, and how her parents or her dad just did not like her, did not really see her. Or, yeah, Julie was the one that was the rebel of the family.
But
But,
still like the golden child at the same time, which is a
yeah.
really like interesting
Mm-hmm.
combination.
Yeah, and getting her POV was really nice, because we don't really get Julie's ever. We get sort of Miller's idea of her, but it was nice to get the sort of what the sister thought of all of what's going on. And everything with her in the prison underground was perfect for that. And I love Amos helping everyone out, and with the caretaker that he had met when he was a kid. Um, I love that part. I can't really think of anything that I did not like in book five. I think book six, it took me a month and a half to read, and that never happens. And yeah.
I really enjoyed on book five that plot with the Martian, is it president?
Mm-hmm.
And the rescue mission for Naomi, where Bobby is just like rides a is it a nuke or something? I can't remember, but she rides like a bomb or
Mm-hmm.
something over to Naomi's destroyed ship or grounded ship, but grounded, I mean, wrong word, but it's not going anywhere. It's on the float pretty much. But there were so many fun, like high octane, like very almost aggressive and like these moments where it's just really high action and I'm like, "Oh, like that's happening." And it just I don't know, like it's so fun. Like some of these moments are so fun. I'm very, very curious to know what you think coming up to the next book because things change like quite a bit and I really want to know if you're like into it or not into it at all. Cuz I quite like the next, what is it, 7? Yeah, book 7. I really liked it, but a lot of people don't. So I don't know. I don't know.
I typically enjoy less favorable books and series, so maybe I'll
Okay,
like
yeah,
it.
that's
Who knows?
true. Well, I didn't have any expectation and I mean, I was waiting for it. So the moment that it was published, like I didn't have any expectations whatsoever. So when I opened it, I was like, "Oh, okay, like that's different. All right, cool." But I will say this though. One of the other things, like one of the real positive things I feel about the series is all of the locations. So, like, of course, I'm not a huge fan of Illis when they're on like the ground, but the way that the environment is for each ship almost has its own personality, and the way that it's written, it's really fun. Like, up from that beginning when they're on the Canterbury and it's just kind of like real working class. I don't know if you remember the beginning of Alien
Hmm.
where they're kind of just like they're like space plumbers, you know what I mean? Like they're not anything flashy or fancy. They're just going to do a job to get paid and then coming back and monotonous, repetitive stuff. And so we have that going on the Canterbury. And then they get to the Donager. And then they take the Rocinante. And like every time that they're on a different ship or a different location, I really love getting that in world feel for like how even just changing that changes the whole atmosphere of how like they're living, I guess, if that makes sense. I don't know if I
Yes,
described it very well.
it does because book one has a very industrial feeling, especially with Miller, where he is
Yeah,
visiting all these locations that are sort of, uh, I guess, less clean, where he is going into
yeah,
the alleyways and beating people up, and it's like, tell me who where Clarissa is or where Julie is,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
and Holden is sort of our White Knight character, where in a fantasy book he would be the shining armor guy, like I'm gonna save you,
yeah.
and he causes so much shit in the beginning because he's like, we
I
are
love
under
that though.
attack.
Yeah, I love how he subverts that trope. Totally. Totally. It's like we're going to make him the protagonist, but we're going to make him super annoying and like somewhat delusional. Perfect.
And then he does it again, uh, like
Yeah.
after that, and I think it's Avasarala gives him the go ahead to do that. She's like, "Hey, remember when you caused this giant war? Uh, can you do it again this time?"
Yeah. Please, James Holden. Yeah.
Because he is such like a wild card for everybody, and it takes Fred Johnson a while to finally be like, okay, you can be part of the organization permanently. And Holden like is like, here's my list of conditions. I want this and
Yeah.
this and this, and Fred is just like, fine, okay, like I'll hire you on.
Yeah, I like that. It's like they all get their ticket to freedom in that moment, and it's kind of cool that they're all like on board for it. And yeah, I think too with these books, there's a lot of great minor characters.
Hmm.
Like Anderson Dawes was always this like sneaky, slimy, very interesting character. And then I don't know, like it's real fun. It's real fun how we keep this like rotating cast of new faces that come and go. Like, I mean, even Prax's daughter, like this child who is, I think, the prologue of a book. It's coming from like a 5-year old or something, and it's really different. So, like, they do kind of keep you on your toes that way, where you're like, oh, I didn't expect that. I didn't see that coming. Interesting.
Yeah, that was in book two, I believe, because Prax was one of my favorite POVs that we had early in the series because he's not really involved afterwards. I mean, his daughter gets kidnapped, and Holden and Miller and everyone has to go save her, and finds out that there's a whole lot of weird science experiments going on. The experimenting with a proto molecule, and everyone's like, "Oh, okay, this is a lot darker than what we thought,
Yeah.
and we need to get out of here now." And
Yeah.
we don't really hear from Prax again. We get a few POVs and Babylon's Ashes when he's like, "Hey, we figured out how to have a fully sustainable energy transfer if we are on the other side of the rings." And somebody is on the other side already doing this, and they are sending ships through. And we don't know who's doing that. And so I assume that is what the final three books are about. But I hope Prax is
Did
a major character in the final few.
I'm not gonna say anything. I will say it's not the very last you'll see of him. So yeah. I'm trying to think at the end of book six, the one that you've just finished, how does that end? Is there an epilogue? Does anything
So
happen after like the snap where they all disappear?
there is a epilogue with Anna, but I'm just kind of scanning through. Um,
Because
yeah, she
I'm real confused of how I forget exactly how that book ends. And there's one moment that I feel like happens, but I don't want to bring it up because it is such a huge part of the next three, and I don't want to spoil anything for you. But it's a new ship, I guess. I will say that. That's not a big deal. But I remember like when we get to these later books, like the names for some of these ships that come into play, I'm just like, oh, that's so cool. There's the Gathering Storm, and I was like, Gathering Storm. It made me think of Wheel of Time, and I'm like, that's cool. Um, so many ship names are just so cool, like the Weeping Sun and Nast or Bliss. I don't remember how to say it. The Witch of Endor.
Yep.
Like, there's so many cool ship names, and I mean, it all starts from like the beginning where Alex is like, "Oh, I'm gonna. How about we name it the Screaming Firehawk?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, let's just advertise to the entire solar system this is a stolen warship." Cool. It's just fun. The oh, hands down, favorite location, hands down, is the okay, it goes through many different names, but the Mormon generation ship and how it evolves into different things like over and over. Because it's just this monstrosity. It is massive. And Fred Johnson is like, yeah, sorry, Mormons. I'm commandeering that. Deal with it. And then it becomes the Behemoth, and I loved that whole plot. I think it's book three, yeah, where everyone's injured in the attack and everyone's, bleeding out, and they need gravity because your blood is just going to pool inside your insides, I guess, and not do what it needs to do. So they spin the drum on the behemoth. And I thought that was hands down like one of the coolest, I guess, representations where it's like, okay, like we're going to make this medical problem like go hand in hand with the physics of real world, and like that's going to be a whole plot like device right here. And it really like, I don't know, it's such a great example of hard science fiction in my opinion, where it's like, yes, this makes sense, this has real world application, yes, awesome, like 100% cool, loved it.
I think one of my there's a great physics moment that happens. I think in book 5 when the rescuing Naomi. It's after they have her and they're trying to pick up speed for the ship to like get out of the orbit. I think it's maybe book 4 when they're trying to get out of the orbit of Elis, and they're like, let's
Yes.
just turn on the missiles, just all of them at once, and hit it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that part was really cool. What is it? The whatever type of like firing power that they have, like shooting the gun was like pushing the ship higher into atmosphere because they were right on the border of like atmosphere, no atmosphere. And by the moment that they drop to a certain level, they're plummeting, like they're falling, they're in free fall and they can't stop. So they have to like start shooting to like rise. That was really cool. I totally forgot about that until now.
So now that we've talked about everything we love and enjoy about this series, let's get a little bit into the bad. And I want to start off with the repetitive villains because it was a little much. Because
Well, I mean,
every book
who's the
is like,
repetitive villain? Are there more than one?
well, it's not repetitive. It's just the structure of each book is repetitive, and that
Okay.
we always have sort of our opening incident that starts everything. It's always fun, always theorizing what the fallout is, and then we spend the entire book planning on addressing the villain, and then we get to the villain and somebody realizes comes into play in defeating the villain. And every book it's sort of like that, and every villain is always sort of a high ego. I'm better than everybody. If everything was done my way, we would have no issues. And it's like every single book is like that, and sort of got tired of it. So when Mako comes along and he's like, I hate Naomi. I want her in my clutches so she can see everything I do is, perfect and all this stuff. And she left me, and I hate my son except when he makes me look good. And it's like,
Yeah.
I'm so tired of these villains.
No, I can see that. I actually really liked Marco. I thought he was super realistic. Like he is just a textbook narcissist. And like
Mm-hmm.
I've met people like that where I'm like, oh yeah, like sometimes you can just spot it from a mile away. And with Marco, it's just like the moment he like walks on stage, like he enters the story, you're just like, oh, this guy is gonna be a problem. But he, he just thinks that the ground he walks on is holy, and it's very interesting. It's very interesting because I liked him. I thought it made Naomi make sense, like why she was terrified, why she didn't want to be found, why she was in hiding. And it made a lot of sense for me. But yes, like what you're saying, it does feel a bit formulaic, where it's like step one, we do this. Step two, interesting facts come into play. Step three, we make a plan. Step four, we try to defeat the villain. Step five, maybe something went wrong and we have to go back to another step, and then we go back to defeating the villain. But I think that might have more to do with like the the way that the books were planned, because it came to like it came to an idea of like playing role playing game, and then they were
Hmm.
like, oh, like let's make this into a book series. So like that's why you have like Bobby, who's like the brawler. And then you have Naomi, who is like the smart nerd kind of, and then you have Amos, who is just like the muscle, but he's kind of dopey. uh yeah, like I can definitely see why it would feel formulaic, because it is.
Yeah, I didn't realize. So it was like a role playing game before.
Yeah.
Like, I guess was it a D&D type game, and then took the characters and made the books.
I'm assuming so.
Ooh.
I've never played D&D or anything like that, so I don't really know like how it all works, but yeah, like that's the reason why in book 1 Shed the medic gets like his head blown off. It's because during their gaming sessions, the person who played Shed like just left and didn't come back. So like they just killed him off in world in the same way.
I would definitely do the same because I've run many D&D games and campaigns where people stop showing up, and I'm like, what do I do with them? And that's a really great answer
Just
to just kill them off.
mhm.
I'll keep that in my back pocket next time. But yeah, that's really interesting.
Disappointments.
Yeah.
Yeah, disappointments though. Yeah, I'm trying to think, because before we started recording, this was the one that was giving me problems, where I wasn't sure if I could actually say it because it runs into too much of a spoilery area. But uh, I'll just say that what I thought the main focus of the last 3 books were going to be was something very different than what I had imagined. And I feel like the ending is kind of like, okay, so I'm going to make an example because we've both read The Wheel of Time. But the way that The Wheel of Time ended, I had a feeling like that's how it was going to go. Like it wasn't going to be like sunshine and rainbows. Like it was just kind of going to be like, this is what happened. And you go through the book and you get there. And I feel like it's maybe not as much of a climax for some people, or it was like, oh, kind of disappointing. But for me, it made sense. So there was that like realism to it where I'm like, okay, like it was still enjoyable. So I don't know. Like, I think if you're someone who's expecting like just I don't know like how book 1 is, where you've got like the vomit zombies and the proto molecule and monsters and mayhem. It is much different than that, and it wasn't what I expected. So that was probably like my only real disappointment, but at the same time I was still really satisfied. So
Hmm. I'm trying to think what it could be. Because I remember early on, I was like, "Ooh, I want to see like what created the proto molecule. I hope we get like actual, POVs and stuff like that." And now I don't expect that at all, but I'm really hoping that there is like a POV of like the first like sending off. Doesn't even have to have dialogue. It could just be third person omniscient, and I would be totally fine
okay.
with that. But I'm not expecting
There's
that.
there are some interesting POVs that I think you will like, but it's not like you're gonna be in the body of Zorg, the the I don't know, space alien, where he's explaining the reasoning behind the cosmos and his actions and stuff like that. Which I don't know. I appreciate that because it still falls into this hard sci-fi category where things don't get too um I don't know, just kind of out there and a little bit more like speculative, but it's still pretty grounded, I feel like, which I like because then you've maintained it the entire series. But there's definitely some very interesting things ahead where I'm like, oh, okay, that, huh, okay.
Yeah, because I'm really
But
interested to see like what, because like when Illis was revealed to be like an entire planet that's basically just a not a robot but like a machine,
mhm.
and they were like, "Hey, this is all over the universe." I was like, "What?" And it blew my mind, and I want to see like the next step of that, of like them connecting somehow, or like maybe just more use of the ring stuff, because they locked that down pretty tightly after they went back, and now it's like Medina Station's kind of the
Hub.
gatekeeping. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I I like how in this book that you just read, we go from, I don't know how to say this exactly. So like humans are the most intelligent life form out there. That's all we know. Then the protomolecule is introduced and you're like, "Oh wow, there's something else out there." And we see it in the form of like all of this tech waking up, and we have the proto molecule monsters and the children, and the way that it kind of like hijacks like earth life. And then we get to the disappearance of all the ships and all of the theorizing where it's like, okay, so like there's earth, its factions, and then we have the proto molecule and its builders, and then why, what entity is being aggravated by this type of travel? Like, does it, are the builders somehow connected to this, or is there even something else entirely out there that is like putting a squash to this? And it's really interesting because it makes humanity just feel like insignificant little bugs where it's like we have no understanding of what's really happening out there, and we're still fighting these petty wars with people with like Marco, or we have these people defecting and changing sides and becoming alliance with, or in alliance with other characters and other groups. And it's just like at some point like that has to end, and we have to introduce like the end game. And this is like in book 6, when that ends, you're like putting all of that behind, and now like you're getting into these like cosmic questions, I guess. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting. But again, like it does change things a bit, where like if you were all about the action and suspense and the stuff like that, like maybe you feel more of an attachment to the this first grouping, I guess. First two-thirds of the series, maybe. I don't know. I fully enjoyed all of it till the end. There's not a lot that I didn't like, to be honest. I think, like you said, like some of the villain type characters, yeah. I didn't like it when people die. But again, it's realistic, so I'm not gonna like grumble about it. I will say this though, you can tell definitely in the earlier books, the writing is different because one of the authors is not a writer. So like he was just like winging it really. So I feel like towards the end of the series, it becomes a little bit more smooth, and you can tell that Ty Frank was like kind of getting into it. And yeah, it's impressive. It's impressive for like someone who never wrote to just be like, gonna find a partner and we're gonna make this, and it's fun.
yeah. So I guess the final section that we can go into is sort of the adaptation aspects. So, what do you want to start with on preparing me on my rewatch? What is something I should keep in mind?
Keep in mind that you are not going to some of the characters and plot lines will be different. Some characters kind of get merged or changed, so it's not going to be an exact one for one. But personally, some of the changes that they made, I like better. So this is, I think, the Expanse is like a miracle. Like it is the I don't know. I feel like every show should be looking to the Expanse in terms of like how you do an adaptation, where it's just like very, very faithful, and they made changes depending on like what makes sense and how you can deliver it to an audience where you're not in someone's head the entire time, so you don't know what they're thinking. But it's pretty impressive, pretty impressive. So I'm just excited for you to meet the characters, especially some that you don't like. I mean, you said you don't like Ashford. When he comes into the show, it is very interesting, and I'm very excited to see how you feel about Ashford. It's, yeah, it's good. It's very good. I want to know like what your predictions are though, like show predictions, or if you have any.
um, I guess my biggest prediction is that I feel like they're going to restructure a lot of the plots, like sort of how season one is really book one and two feels like. Because I remember
Yeah,
reading book two, and I was like, oh my gosh, all this Bobby and Avasarala stuff is in season one. Okay, this is great. And I have a feeling that they squashed the timeline a little bit so that we could have like a not short show, but I think it's 6 seasons, right? That's
yeah.
pretty short. I mean, compared to Game of Thrones with 8 and what we could have gone with 10, but in real time is 8 seasons,
Mm.
or at least
Well,
when.
if they would have followed through with the whole entire book series, it would have been 8. So, or 9, 6, 7, 8, 9. It would have been 9 seasons. But yeah, but as soon as you get like into the first chapter of the next book, you'll understand why they didn't proceed, I guess. It's a logical stopping point, but yeah. Yeah. I don't want to give anything away.
Because one thing that I really want to see is the protomolecule squid that flies away at the end of, I think, book two. I really want to see that. Because I had zero idea that that was going to happen.
I
And
totally forget what you're talking about. I don't remember.
so it's when
True.
I think it's book two or three when I can't even remember like how it happened. I just remember in the final chapter before the epilogue, one of our characters is like, "Oh, the proto molecule. Oh, it hit the sun. They sent it into the sun, and then they were like, I think it destroyed it. And then the next book, they're like, oh, something just flew away from the sun, and it looked like an octopus or like a squid.
Hmm.
We touched on it a little bit on the second book coverage for the book club. I
All I
remember.
remember is at the end of the book when they fly Eros into Venus and everything like awakens, it becomes like a squid kind of and starts
Yeah.
growing. But I don't remember what you're talking about. Hmm.
Hmm.
You'll have to send me a reminder because I really don't know. But I don't know. There's a lot about to happen. I'm just excited for you to see the show in general. and see like how it holds, up to your expectations. Because for me, like I watched the first, I think, 2 seasons and then started reading the books. But yeah, like it's it's interesting. That's for sure. I'm trying not to spoil anything. So.
Did you continue watching the show while you read the books, or vice versa?
Um, so as soon as I started reading the books, I went through like all of them until the end, and then I had to like wait for the next one and then wait for the next one. So four, the last four, five, four, I had to wait between each one for. Um, but yeah, I had finished like almost the entire series before they finished the show. I was just waiting on the last, books to come out. But yeah, like I went back and forth multiple times. So it was like wait for the next season, wait for the next book, and back and forth. But it was tricky. Like I forgot things and they started to kind of merge together, but it wasn't like any less enjoyable, I guess, for me.
Cool. Um, is there anything else that you want to talk about before we finish off? We're about an hour, so.
No, I think that sums it up. Like, I'm having a hard time holding back and restraining myself. So I'm just excited to start watching the show with you. I'm going to rewatch and, yeah, make this a thing.
Yeah. And a note for the audience, for anyone who's still watching, we are doing a season by season sort of coverage, along with one of our friends, Laura, who is going to be joining us. She hasn't read the books, so that's why I want to go ahead and get this done, sort of get my thoughts before jumping into the show, because there's a lot to sort of keep track of, and I wanted to get my book thoughts out of the way so I can stop forgetting them and sort of let the show kind of override it, because I can't wait to finally get into the show. I've been really
Yeah,
tempted these last few years. I mean, when it finished, I think 2 or 3 years ago, and the final book came out, I was like, okay, now I need to actually start. And now we're at
it's
the point.
time. It's
Yep.
time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Restraint. I'm restraining myself. Yeah, no, it'll be fun. I'm excited.
Yep. So, with that note, I think we are done for today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This was a whole lot of fun. I'll put the links to Amber's podcast, The Road to Valon, onto the description. So, if you're interested in watching more of her stuff, please go watch it.
Yeah, the podcast is separate. Like the podcast is all Wheel of Time stuff for the most part, but the YouTube channel is a lot of like sci-fi, Wheel of Time, that type of thing. So, yeah.
Yep. So, thank you, everybody, for watching, and please have a great rest of the day.